our Vendor Orientation Purchasing 101 webinar. Today, we will be sharing the rules and laws that govern state procurement, how to do business with the state. We will walk step by step through the bidding process and share tips on how to submit a good proposal. My name is Carla Copes. I am the Community Engagement Specialist for the Hub office. At this time, I am going to ask my colleague, John Gunther, to give us the official welcome. So John, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm John Gunther. I'm the Data and Compliance Manager for the Office for Historically Underutilized Businesses. I'm bringing greetings to you today from our Director, Tammy Hall, and Assistant Director, Alicia Lyons. And we're really happy to see so many people here today. This is a great training. It's a great opportunity to get some knowledge. There's so much in here. If you've been here more than once, it's not a bad thing to come back again. There's so much information to learn in this. We really hope that you take something away. And as Carla said, there will be opportunities to ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. If you put them in the chat, Hub staff may be able to answer those questions as we go along. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Carla, and I'll see you in a little bit. I've got a meeting that I got to run to, but we'll try to be back. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, John. And at this time, without any delay, I am pleased to present to you our presenter, Joni Robbins, who is the Director of Purchasing Section for the Department of Transportation. And so, Joni, if you want to take it over now.
Hi, good morning, Carla. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be with you in this training. As Carla said, I'm Joni Robbins, and I serve as the Director of Purchasing for North Carolina Department of Transportation. And we will walk through tips and directions on how to do business with the state of North Carolina. So I'm going to share. Cool. Thank you. So as Carla said, there is a section at the end of each, there's a opportunity at the end of each section to ask questions, but please feel free to use the chat, and Carla will let me know when there are questions there, and we certainly will address them as we go through. So that's perfectly fine as well. So let's get started. Again, my slides say the Department of Transportation because that is the agency for which I work, but the conversations that we're going to have is overall for the state of North Carolina. If I'm speaking specifically for NCDOT, I would say that to let you know that. All right. So this morning, we're going to be talking about rules of state procurement. We're going to be discussing registering with the state. We're going to talk a little bit about e-procurement, purchasing methods, seeking competition. We're going to talk about solicitation methods, as well as evaluation methods, the award processing, and how we do contract monitoring. So first, we're also going to cover the rules and laws, what's the difference between the two pertaining to purchasing for the state. We're going to talk about what's considered a good versus what's considered a service. We are also going to discuss what does delegation mean and how about policy, what is that? And we are going to talk about the different types of contracts that are available. This slide talks about or shows the hierarchy for the purchasing rules. So to left, the North Carolina General Statutes, those are laws basically that are enacted by the legislation that our elected officials put in place for us. And then the purchase and contract administrative codes are really rules for how we are going to enact the laws that are in place with regard to purchasing. And then you have North Carolina Procurement Manual, which is the policy more or less for North Carolina on, it identifies the course of action that each agency will use in following the rules of the administrative code, how you're going to follow those rules that are listed in the administrative code. And then at the bottom there's a agency purchasing manual. So each agency has their own purchasing manual. If you could mute, please, that would be great. Their own purchasing manual, which really is gets down into the weeds of the procedures, how you will complete the task, right? Those course of actions that are identified, the policies that are identified in the overall North Carolina Procurement Manual. In the agency manual, it'll tell you step by step or how we're gonna complete the task that is listed there. We also have the Office of State Budget Management. Their manual is there. It offers guidance to the agencies and the universities regarding, what expenses and reimbursements are allowable for things like travel on official state business. This slide is talking about the purchasing, the authority that governs purchasing for the state. And to my left is the purchasing contract, which is a division within the Department of Transportation. And this covers goods and services. For non-IT purchasing of goods and services, it falls under the general statute when we talk about the laws. So the laws that covers goods and services, non-IT goods and services, can be found in Chapter 143, Article 3 of the General Statutes, and the Administrative Code is under Title I in Chapter 5. What I would add to that slide is the individual agency purchasing manual, when we talked about that. So that is also one of the governing authorities. For IT purchases, for goods and services, those laws can be found in General Statute Chapter 147. And for the administrative, the rules for IT purchases of goods and services is in Title 9 in Chapter 6 of the Administrative Code. Then we also have state construction, which obviously speaks to the construction, renovation, or alteration of physical properties belonging to the state, and the rules and statutes for that can be found in chapters 116, 143, and 153. And then, of course, there's also a state construction manual as well. Procurement offices for the state generally use these two governing authorities, the purchasing contract and the IT technology. There's a construction office, and that's but for goods and services for state purchases, we are going to generally deal specifically with the purchasing contract, General Statute 143, and for IT goods and services, General Statute 147. So what opportunities are there to work with the state? So we are identifying that we have 28 executive agencies. We have, we have over 2,500 public and charter schools available, 100 counties, over 500 municipalities, 58 community colleges, and 16 public universities. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to be able to work with the state of North Carolina. On this slide, it was just really listing the state agencies that are out there. And so if you look at the column that says type of agency, I just like to point out, if it says cabinet, those are the agencies whose the head of the agency is appointed by the governor, and the council agencies are the head of those agencies are our elected officials. And then we have some support offices out there as well. So how do we identify a need? So first thing the agency needs to answer are questions like this. What are you buying? How much does it cost? Does the division have the funding? How do we buy it? And what kind of documentation do we need? Those are the things that the agency are looking at when they're making a decision around identifying a need. And then purchasing, my office and the offices that are in the other purchasing offices and the other agencies are determining by what are you trying to buy and how much does it cost. That's the very first thing we look at when a requisition comes into our office is how much money are we spending, because that will determine for us how we need to handle the purchase of that. We also look at, are we buying a good or are we buying a service? Because the procurement process can be a little different for both of those categories. And we're going to look at delegations, which I speak a little bit more about that later. But a delegation is how much can the agency spend without having further review by the Division of Purchasing Contract for non-IT and for this IT statewide procurement office for IT purchases. And then what are mandated? Is it a mandated resource or is it an open market opportunity? We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But basically, the mandated resources are really things like our state term contract. So if there's a contract already in place, then we are mandated. And there are some other agency organizations like Correctional Enterprise that we are required to look at for purchases to see if they're available and if the pricing is there and can they provide it when we need it. And then open market is really the competitive process that when we post bids. So that's what we're referring to when we say open market. So goods versus services, what are they? So for goods, they are all commodities, supplies, materials, equipment, and it's really anything that's tangible, right? That you can basically hold in your hand. There is a 1.75% charge on goods for the state. And those are just some basic examples, particular which is tangible things. So our office supplies, again, things that you can basically put your hands on. And then for services, there are intangible work or tasks that's performed by the individual or company that requires specialized knowledge, some expertise, experience, or similar capabilities. And some examples of that, you see the gentleman here providing some type of plumbing. And so that is a service. We see power washing here. That's also a service. Then we'll talk a little bit about agency delegation. So each state agency, the community college and the universities have a set general purchasing delegation, which the state procurement officer approves. He or she can either, currently say he, can either raise or decrease it depending upon a couple of guidelines, which has to do with really the ability, the proven ability of that entity to be able to handle purchases over a certain amount is really what he's looking for. So for instance, for most agencies, the delegation amount for non-IT items is $50,000. So if NCDOT wishes to purchase a good or service that is over $50,000, we will go through the procurement process for that purchase, and then we will send all of the documentation that we gathered as we go through each step of the process to purchasing contracts for them to review. And they're really looking at to make sure that we follow the administrative codes and the general statutes with regard to purchases of that nature. And if it was required to be competitively bid, did we do that? And did we follow the competitive process? And so when they take a look at that, they say, yes, you did. Yes, you checked that box. Yes, you checked that box. And then they will provide us approval to award. And so that's what the delegation really means. For purchases that are under the delegation amount, so anything that comes in for NCDOT or any agency at this point that's under the, $50,000, then we do it in-house, meaning we're not required to send it over to either purchasing contracts for non-IT or the IT statewide purchasing office for any IT purchases. So that last bullet point there is just what I said. Anything over the delegation, it must be approved by PNC or the Department of Information Technology, which is basically the statewide IT procurement office. I'm going to talk a little bit about purchasing policy. Now, this slide is pertaining to NCDOT. So since I'm the one who's doing the presenting, I put our information up there. It could look a little different if you go to another agency, but it would not be drastically different from this because we all, again, have to follow the same rules under and over a certain amount of money. So for NCDOT, anything that's less than $10,000, we consider that a micro purchase, whether it's a good or service. And we encourage our business units in our 14 different divisions across the state to use their P card to purchase it. So we do get some purchases in my office that are less than $10,000, but we should not be seeing a whole lot of them because the different business units within NCDOT and the 14 different divisions across the state for NCDOT, they should be using their P card for all those purchases. I will add that is a great area which we promote and encourage our business units and our divisions to utilize hub vendors in those categories. It's always great to identify, to let the division in your area, because as I said, the divisions are 14. There's 14 divisions across the state for NCDOT, and they are broken up by counties. So if you don't mind, if you could put Nicole Giami's name and contact information, or I could provide it once I'm done. And if you can reach out to her, and she can certainly let you know what division you're in. And it's always great to get to know what their needs are and how you can help them. Because in this micro purchase section, they're not required to do any form of competition, so they can just award in that area. So it's a great place for our hub vendors. For NCDOT, anything $10,001 up to $25,000, we consider it to be a small purchase, whether it's good or service. And I do require that we have at least one informal vendor quote. If it's a service, I do require that we use our what we call our paper, which is really our solicitation documents, the RFQ, request for a quote, or our IFB, which is invitation for bid, if it's a service. And the reason for that is if it's a service, sometimes there are some legal requirements that we have to adhere to. For instance, for our janitorial services, sometimes in our smaller divisions, they may not provide janitorial service every day. And so it is likely that that contract would be it probably close to $25,000, but it would not be over that in those cases. But janitorial contracts comes with a lot of HIPAA requirements, and so we need to be able to have a contract in place that in which our vendor has acknowledged that they understand and agree to adhere to those legal requirements. So we need actual, not just a quote of invoice. We're looking for terms and conditions, and that's why we would use our solicitation document for those services. And then anything that's $25,001 up to $50,000, we consider that as an informal purchase. Competition is required, but it's not advertised. So we would not normally, there may be one or two exceptions, but normally we would not advertise anything that's less than $50,000. Competition is required, which means that I'm requiring my staff to have received at least 3 quotes on our documentation, our using our terms and conditions, because the vendor has to agree in that category. They have to agree to North Carolina terms and conditions, and when that is a requirement, we use our solicitation documents. And so for goods is generally used with a request for quote, RFQ. If it's a service, we generally use our invitation for bid, our IFB, or our request for proposal, which is our RFP. And then anything that is $50,001 and over is a formal purchase, whether it's goods or service. And again, the vendor has to agree to North Carolina terms and conditions. So that means that it will be on our documentation, which is either those solicitation documents that I mentioned, the RFQ, the IFB, or the RFP. It is advertised and on the open market, which means we will post a bid for it. Or there are circumstances in which we can approve a waiver of competition, but those are very specific. And for NCDOT, regardless of the amount, I require that it gets my approval, because I want to make sure that we have no other options. I believe strongly in competition. And so if we're not going to compete, then I want to make sure that I understand why, and there really isn't any other option for the state. And then contract terms is standard is usually 3 years. It usually reads 1 year with 2 one-year renewable options. And if we require, and we do, depending upon what the service or the good is that we're purchasing, if it's a competitive process and it's a very complex process, we generally want to do that longer than 3 years. But I really take a look at that because I want to engage or have our competitive process as often as it makes sense for the state to do that. If I need a contract longer than 3 years, it requires the state purchasing officer's approval. And so even if it's under the agency delegation, then I'm still required to get his approval. For any contracts that are estimated to be over $1 million, we are required to have it reviewed both by the attorneys that are here at NCDOT, as well as when it goes over the purchasing contracts at the Division of the Division of Purchase and Contracts in the Department of Administration. Then they will also have their legal team take a look at it. And that's prior to posting and before awarding as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about state term contracts. And this is that mandated resource that we were talking about. One of the things that when it gets to the requisition gets into my office, what are the things that my staff are looking at? Is it a mandatory resource? One of the mandatory resources, state term contracts. So the basic definition is that it's a binding agreement between the purchaser and the vendor, which is the purchaser would be in this case the state, because with the exception of the universities, all the agencies are required, if it's a state term contract that is mandatory, And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next point. But it's an agreement between the state and the vendor to buy and sell certain commodities, printing or services at certain prices and under certain terms and conditions. So our statewide term contracts are actually put in place by the Division of Purchasing Contracts for use by all agencies, unless they're exempted by statute, rules, or some special terms and conditions specific to that contract. So a state term contract can be either mandatory or convenient. If it's mandatory, then we are required to use it to buy that good and or service that is identified on that contract. If we need either of those, we are required to use that contract to buy it. So we would not be getting into a competitive process because that process has already taken place. There's a contract already in place, and so we will buy from that. If the state term contract is identified as convenience, that means that we can choose, we, the agencies, can choose to use it or not. So you look at different things to determine whether you want to use it or not, but you're not required if it says convenient. These state term contracts are searchable, a list with the contract manager information. You can go to the Division of Purchasing Contract website, which is located on the Department of Administration website. And there's a tab there for state term contracts, and you can click that, and there's a lot of them out there, and you can see what they are. I would advise you to go take a look and see if the good and/or service that you want to provide to the state is also being covered on the state term contract. So, and look at when the current contract is set to expire. And months before that, then the purchasing contracts folks will be putting out, or should be putting out, another solicitation, and you want to take advantage of any opportunity to get on a state term contract, because that's also a good way of making sure increasing the chances of you being able to do business with the state, let me put it that way. And we think that the state term contracts, the goal of them is to offer lower prices. There's always good quality products there, and it should be shorter delivery times. The agencies are also able to put agency-specific term contracts in place, and it is just what it says. It's specific to that particular agency. And it's for a specific amount of time. It's usually an indefinite quantity contract, which means we'll go on contract with vendor A. We're not promising vendor A that we are going to buy any certain quantity, but we will buy as needed. And the award is based on historical data. As we need it is really what we look at when we put in place agency-specific term contracts. So for service contracts, it's an agreement with the independent vendor or company, and this company is going to perform certain work or tasks that requires, as we said earlier, specialized knowledge, some experience, expertise, similar capabilities. And it says in the vendor receiving payment for services over 600 must submit that 1099 form, and I'm sure you know that. There are two types of service contracts. There's either a contractual service or it's a consultant service. And we'll talk a little bit about here what's the difference. So a contractual service is that independent vendor who performs work or tasks that requires that specialized knowledge or skills that we talked about. Some examples are there: building maintenance, vending, security guards. Those are specialized skills. Some medical lab services, landscaping. And a consultant contract, it also requires the work being performed, requires specialized knowledge, experience, and professional qualification The difference being in a consultant contract, the vendor is going to provide counsel, review, analysis, or advice on how to formulate or implement an improvement on a particular program or service. So they are consulting, giving us direction or advice of provide some analysis and not actually performing a task or work duty. And so that is the difference between the two. And any contractual service or consultant service contract must be approved by the governor's office. There's a process in place that makes that happen, and it would be seamless to the vendor. They won't even know that, but that is part of what happens when you put a contractual service or consultant service in place. I'm sorry, when you put a consultant service in place. This is the time for any questions. Caller, do we have any questions? Or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question.
We did have a question in the chat, and we've been answering questions.
Okay.
But I do want to bring this one forward. The question was, how do we find out about informal purchases if advertisement is not required? And I just wanted to give you an opportunity, Joni, to answer that question.
So that is where building relationship is critical. So for each agency, I would most of us have or are putting in place what we call a hub liaison. And for my office, that would be Nicole Giammi. And Nicole is the person you really want to know for NCDOT, to know what opportunities are out there. I would make sure that she has your information for our different divisions. Again, she can let you know who are the folks inside those divisions that you can be in contact with, and with our different business units as well. So you're right. If it's informal and it's not advertised, then you're gonna have to do some work on your end to make sure that folks are aware of what you are, this good and or service that you're offering, want to do work with the state for. So, and any networking opportunities, the agencies work in conjunction with the hub office. For NCDOT, we have the Office of Civil Rights, who also do vendor outreach. Whenever you hear or know of an event of that nature that's happening, you really need to try to participate and be there, give you an opportunity to meet folks that you really would need to know in order to promote your business.
We do have a hand raised, Wiley Purcell, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Purcell Wiley. My company is CCTV Master, LLC. And what we do is we clean, inspect, assess underground utilities. And I have, I think, two questions. One is that PNC website, how do we get to that?
So I think, Carla, we could put that in the chat for them.
It has been placed in the
Okay.
chat. You will
Okay.
find, I think we posted the IPS website. So just check the chat.
Okay. Question number two, contractor versus consultant. I kind of like straddle the fence on that, because what we do is that when we inspect underground utilities, especially pipe, sewer, storm drain, water, or whatever, we inspect the whole pipe, we video it, and usually that information is put in a form and given to the engineers for them to make a decision of what they see. So I'm on the one hand, we're on a contractual side, because we're usually on a contract for somebody as a sub for somebody who's actually maybe even digging or replacing a pipe or something of that nature. So I feel like we kind of straddling the fence as you presented it on the screen there. So do we lean one way or the other?
I think it is actually going to come down to what your end result is. If it's a situation in which you come in and, as you say, you videotape, tape, and provide that information to them, then I think that is more of a consulting.
Here's my issue. My issue is that there's probably no contract for us simply to do that. Very rarely do we have a contract to come in and just video stuff. Usually there's a contract that speaks to replacing something, digging something, or whatever, and the pipe comes out or the pipe is altered, and we have to make sure we come in to make sure the condition is there so they know what decision they need to make, the contractor. And then when they finish, then we have to come back and video again to make sure that is done properly. Now, we don't make that decision. We just provide that information for that decision.
Right. So you are subbing, and so you are subbing on a contractual service contract.
Okay.
So what you're going to do is going to, I would think, fall in that category because, as you said, you're subbing.
Right.
And the primary is actually performing a task or some work.
Right.
And what you're doing is supplementing that.
Okay.
So I think you will fall under what you just described falls under the contractual service as far as your role in that process.
Gotcha. Now, my last question, I think.
That's fine.
Your hub assistant, does she have a phone number?
She does.
It has been placed in the chat. Nicole, yes, it's in the chat.
Thank you.
We also have
I have to get in the chat, but I can take care of that later on. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. And we have a hand raised, Michelle Neal, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, I was just wondering, like, when I get on that site, like to start looking at contracts or bidding or whatever the case may be, it's just so foreign. It's like, I don't really know some of the terminology that they're asking or requiring for you to even start bidding with them. Is it someone that can kind of walk you through that whole process when you log into that site?
So, yeah, you could always, there is a, so let me tell you, my best advice is this, to be honest with you. So NCDOT, we offer, also offer outreach opportunities. And one of the programs that we do is tips and tools. And it's in the evening. I think our time is generally 6 o'clock. Nicole can let you know when our next one is scheduled for. And we, at that time, walk through a solicitation document, what each step means, what you need to pay particular attention to, what we're looking for in evaluations and things of that nature. In the interim, between now and the next time we have that class, if you have a specific question, you can always reach out to Nicole and we will get an answer for you. Now, if it is not an NCDOT solicitation, right, we can just speak to the general idea of what that section is looking for, right? Because we're not doing the purchase. If it's one of our solicitation, and the thing you have to also keep in mind is that once a solicitation is posted, you really should only be talking to the person who is identified on the solicitation document. Their name and contact information should be listed there. But there's also language in the solicitation document that says that all questions should be provided in written form and give you a day and time to submit your written question. And generally what happens is, for instance, if I had a solicitation posted and I said that if I posted it today, February the 15th, and my questions due date is, let's just say it would be longer, but February the 20th by 2 p.m. So even if you sent me a question today, I'm going to keep your question, right? I'm going to build me a spreadsheet that has each question that comes in. And if I said the questions are due by February the 20th at 2 p.m., on February the 20th, all the questions I have, I'm going to put it on the spreadsheet, depending upon what the question is. If the question is specific to the service and or good that we are soliciting for, I'm going to take that question and send it to our end user, the person that we're doing the purchasing for, the area, the division or the business unit, because they're the subject matter experts. What my folks are good at is purchasing, making sure we're following the rules and the guidelines and administrative codes. So we're going to send your question to them. They're going to provide us with the response, right? If the question is purchasing related, then I can answer that question. So I'm going to have a table, if you will, with all the questions. It will provide all, and with the answers beside it. And then I'm going to post that back on IPS so that everyone sees every question we receive, every response we receive, every response we provided, and everyone will get the information at the same time. So the challenge that you may run into, if you wait when the solicitation is posted, your questions should be in written form. If you called me, right, you could, if I'm the purchaser and I'm the person identified on solicitation, you pick up the phone and call me. I could answer your question. I should not. I should direct you to submit your question in written form as specified on the solicitation. But what you need to remember, even if that person answers your question, unless you submit your question in writing, whatever they tell you over the phone is not legally binding on the state. So your best, and that's one of the reasons. So that document that I said I'm gonna post with all the questions, with all the responses, I'm gonna post it on IPS. That document is called an addendum. And when I award the contract, anything that's posted on the IPS, that's part of the contract. So whatever our response I put out there, that makes it legally binding on the state. If you pick up the phone and call me, and if I answer you, then you have no recourse to hold me responsible for whatever I said. And that's why I do not encourage my staff to answer questions over the phone, because I want everything to be forward and included in the contract, with everyone having the same expectation and understanding. That seems to be a long response to your question. I apologize, but I think that to kind of wrap that up, I would make sure I stay on top of the outreach opportunities, particularly with NCDOT, in that we do a solicitation review document and talk about what the different sections mean and how you should respond to those, and what information folks are looking for when they review that.
Okay. So
And in the interim, reach out to Nicole, and if we can help you with a general, again, if it's not our solicitation, we cannot advise you. We can tell you what the section is asking about, because we all use the same template, but we can change it to meet our needs. So again, if it's not NCDOT's, then we could just give you a general idea, because we're not the we're not the buying or purchasing agency for that. And you really should be talking to the folks who are going to actually do the award.
So Nicole could direct me in which way I need to go. I mean, because my service is like a cleaning service, and like we do a array of cleaning, like it just like a full cleaning service. Mainly, we mainly do commercial stuff, and like we have a contract with the city now. And that, but I got that because I was invited to come to a bid, to put in a bid.
Right.
And so then once we got HUD certified and I get on the site and start looking, it just all seems so foreign. So I was just trying to see, if there was a Pacific class or something that I could go to so that it could break it down for me, like in each section, like, and not just be on there, just looking for whatever.
Right. So the closest that I know of for that is the Tips and Tools class that we offer in the evening. So if you can reach out to Nicole, she can let you know what the schedule for the next one is. I'm sure that, yes. And now also understand these are for state solicitations. It would not cover anything for the city. It will only be for the state.
Let's say, well, I mean, that's kind of the direction I wanted to be able to tap into a state contract too.
Perfect. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And I see that we still have a few hands raised, but we are going to move forward to the next module. And if you who have your hand raised did not get a chance to voice your question, you will get an opportunity after the next module. Okay. And so Joni, let's move forward.
Thank you, Carla.
You're welcome.
So in this section, we're going to talk about, we're going to switch gears here and talk about the process you need to follow if you want to do business with the state. And we're going to talk about e-procurement. We're going to talk about EVP, and we're going to talk just a little bit about the e-procurement 2020 upgrade. So the e-procurement basics, the takeaway from this slide is that it is a electronic ordering system used by most state agencies. It's a single point of access for the North Carolina government organizations. And there is a 1.75% fee for goods only. So if you're providing a service that is not applicable to you. E-procurement frequently asked questions. We think, why is my company required to pay the 1.75%? This fee offsets the expenses of the e-procurement for the state. It also allows the state to conduct business electronically. And it's also makes it possible for our vendors to market the business that you want to do with the different state entities there. How does your company benefit by using e-procurement? We think it's a cost savings in the area of processing, marketing, and administrative for you. It helps with order accuracy and consistency throughout the delivery. We also believe that it's an asset because it's a single point of access to all state entities in which you want to do business, which in turn increases your access to the North Carolina government markets that are out there. The electronic vendor portal, I think the takeaway with this is that it's free. When you register, it will notify you of business opportunities with the different state agencies and universities. You would need to make sure you keep your information updated for contact reasons, as well as when the agencies in those smaller dollar categories are looking for hub vendors to offer goods and services that opportunities that are there, that is what they look at. So when my team is purchasing something, you know, in that small purchase area, informal area window, then and we're looking for a hub vendor, then that is the vendor portal is where they go to get that information. So it's really important that you make sure your information is kept current there. So with the registration, you would need, of course, internet access. You need either a federal tax ID or your EIN number, your employer identification number, and you also would need a valid email address. I believe Carla is going to provide you with this presentation, so you will be able to. There's a link that's here. You'll be able to go to the registration page and get some direction and some help from there if you need it. And you'll be able to get to that from that link there. The eProcurement 2020 upgrade. This is really a cloud-based system. I think for me, the biggest thing was we switched with our commodity codes. We went to the standard. It's called UNSPSC, which stands for the United Nations Standards, Products and Service Codes. It's a global multi-sector standard for efficiency and accuracy classification of the products and services you're offering. So we just kind of really got in line with the other states or nations, what they're doing. And so North Carolina is in line with that. I believe it's a 6-digit code. If you were already in the eProcurement, so I think you were automatically transitioned if you were registered in a portal. Are there any questions?
Yes, we do have a question regarding the 1.75% fee. Kevin Smith wants to know if you can add that cost into your bid.
Absolutely. Then you should. But you also want to be competitive, right? So, but yeah, absolutely, you can do that.
Yes. We also have a hand that was raised from our last module, Tanya Green. I'm not sure. I believe we answered her question, and perhaps she just didn't put her hand down. But if that's not true, Tanya, you can unmute and ask your question.
Good morning. Yes, this is Tanya Green with Delectus LLC, and we provide staff augmentation, recruiting, HR services, and consulting. My question is around certifications with DOT. Is it required to have particular certifications in order to be able to bid? Or is that favored in any capacity outside of HUB?
It's not required, but we certainly are looking for our certified vendors when we have opportunities, but it's not a requirement, no. There are certain aspects of NCDOT business that requires pre-qualification. What you identify for me as to what the services that you're offering, to my knowledge, are not in that category.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is John with the Hub office. If I recall correctly, there are occasionally some small business set aside sorts of things. And I think in order to participate in those, you would have to have the NCDOT Small Business Enterprise certification.
Yes.
And I could
Thank
be
you, John.
corrected
You're
on
right.
that.
No. I had that thought, but I couldn't recall what that was, but you're right, John. Thank you.
Now, is that the SBE certification or is that separate? Is that something different?
That's the
So there-
NCDOT
Yes, okay,
SBE certification, not the hub one.
got it.
Right.
Thank you.
Trying to put
And-
my hand down, by the way. I can't seem to do it.
All right, and we also have a hand raised, Purcell, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. What is the difference between a UN SPSC number and a NIC code?
You said a NIT code?
Yeah.
So-
We basically use the National Association standard for identifying what we actually do. And you mentioned the UN SPSC.
Mm-hmm. John, do you know? I'm not sure what a NIT code is, but I would think that they are the same, where you identify in the category in which you want to work.
Yeah, yes, but one's national and yours is a united one, I think it is.
I think he's speaking of the NAICS code.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, and they're different code sets. And the organization that uses them basically has to pay for them in order to use them. And the ones that met for the procurement part of things, where it comes to like buying goods and services, it was determined that the UNSPSC commodity codes matched what we needed a bit more. I don't believe that we've used on the goods and services side NAICS codes before for the state. We used to use NIGP codes, which are still different than NAICS codes. So I do believe that NAICS codes are used by the DOT Disadvantaged Business Enterprise certification
Right.
part. So I think there is a difference there.
So I need to go back in and change my codes for North Carolina hub.
Well, if you were in hub before we switched from NIGP to UNSPSC, everybody who was in there before was converted to the new system. It's wise to go in to EVP and make sure that those
Gotcha.
codes match what you want, because it was a cross matching, and hopefully it got everybody right. But it's always good to keep an eye on your codes to
Okay.
make sure that they really represent what you do.
All right. Thank you so much.
We have a hand raised, M&J Trucking, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. So we provide services within North Carolina, and we currently hold a state contract with the North Carolina DOT on some bridges that are coming in. Question is when you bid on a contract and say you have situations like COVID and things that take effect that affect us on fuel and cost and things like that, is there any way to get your current contract where they consider possibly raising the rates?
There isn't anything that prohibits you from requesting that and sending in your justification and ask for it. And the business unit will make a decision, and we will process it based on their decision. So there isn't anything that prohibits you from asking that question.
Okay, yes, ma'am. And
I
who
would
do it?
also make sure I sent in the documentation, you know what I mean, the real justification that is business focused and what your real increases are. I'm
Yes, ma'am.
sorry, you
And
was
who would that
asking.
go to?
So no, it's fine. In your contract, it should have a administrator identified, who you're working with on that contract would be a good place to start.
Okay.
And they will be they will be in touch with my office if it's one that, and we do a lot of those type of contracts. So it would just depend on if it was a solicitation out of my office, then the contract that you have has a individual identified and with the contact information. So that would be a great place to start. If it's at NCDOT, there are some purchases that are handled just in the divisions. If it's one of those and you don't have my solicitation document, then I would start with the person that you work with directly.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We also have Jaleese Dawson, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Jaleese Dawson. I'm the co-founder of Georgelle, and we're a digital marketing service providing brand management, video production, and websites. We recently gained our Hub certification and was just wondering if you could provide any tips for beginners who are submitting RFPs.
I will start by saying you are in the right place today and attending this session. And so you will get a lot of tips of how to begin the process of doing business with the state. And Joni, if you want to add anything.
I would just reiterate what I spoke about earlier with regard to getting in touch with Nicole and seeing when we will offer our next tips and tools outreach training opportunity. Because I believe that we are going to, the next topic will be a request for proposal. And it'll be a great opportunity to walk with us as we go through the proposal document itself and talk about the different sections. That's one way to do that. I always suggest that if you know of a RFP that was awarded recently, you can always do a public record request. The only thing that the state is required not to provide is any confidential or proprietary information. Even with that information will be redacted, and any remaining information will be provided once it's awarded. Once the solicitation or competitive process is awarded, it becomes public information, and you can always send in a public record request and ask for the last proposal that was awarded, and take a look at that and see, how that award-winning proposal was presented in terms of information provided and things of that nature.
That's a really great tip. Just along that lines, who would we contact? Would we contact the same, contact that was listed on the RFP for that information?
You would not. So for NCDOT, and I will get that information and provide it to caller, and if she would be kind enough to include it in the information that's going to go out at the end of this session, that'll be great. So I will get to caller the public record information contact, how you request that. And so it'll be provided in the information that comes from this session. Please keep in mind that each agency handles the public records request differently. What I'm providing is for NCDOT. For most of them, some of them, if you contact the purchasing office, some of them, prior to coming to DOT, I was with the Department of Public Instruction, and there as the purchasing manager, I was able to, you could have just sent your request to me, and I would have gathered the documentation you were asking for, and I would have emailed it right back out to you, right, within a reasonable period of time, and depending upon what you're asking for. But here at NCDOT, it actually has to go through our communications office. You will contact them. I provide that information, and they will contact me. I will get the information together, send it to them, and they will respond to and send you the information. So it's another step added. Again, agencies do it differently. And that's how NCDOT chooses to handle public requests. It's a huge agency and we get all kinds of public, so it's probably a good thing that it goes through the communications group.
Thank you. And what was Nicole's last name?
Jami, that is spelled,
And I'm sorry, I was just gonna say it's that information has
Okay.
been placed in the chat.
thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had to, my internet went in and out. So I don't know if you don't mind placing it again. I can't see the chat from earlier today. Sorry about that.
Okay, all right, we will.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're
No
welcome.
problem. We have one more hand raised. We'll take this last question from God's Favor. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, good morning to all.
Good morning.
This is a good presentation. All the information is very helpful and useful. We are a small, veteran-owned trucking company that provides service over the road and local, dry van and refrigerated, temperature control, and we are hub certified through North Carolina. And just trying to navigate through the waters of how to get contracts doing business with the state of North Carolina. And we are certified through SAM's registration also. How do we do business with the state? And we are located in Forsyth County.
You're located where?
In Forsyth County.
Forsyth County, okay.
Yes.
So again, I think it will come down to relationship building, making sure, since you are a trucking company, I would make sure that the different divisions in which you're willing to, if it's across the state, then I would make sure that you are aware of the different outreach events that happens, and make sure those folks, because they will call the, often we have what we called we have some trusts in which we use our own, but we also, for instance, that go to the quarries and get sand or get asphalt or get aggregate and take it to our different locations in which is needed, the different division offices in which is needed. And so they do use independent trucking companies to do that. So I would make sure that I know who in each of the divisions are making those kinds of decisions, and make sure that they are aware that you are out there and you're willing and able to haul for them, right? Nicole, again, would be a good place to start with regard to providing you with the contact information. And if we know of any outreach that they're having in the area, we can make sure that we share that information with you as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And I will be reaching out to Ms. Nicole. Thank you so much for your time and effort.
Absolutely.
And I thought I saw Shirley Gray with your hand raised. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
Actually, I did bring the hands down. I'm surprised it was still there. No, but I have the same question like Gunter has mentioned too, and I have been on here quite a few times as well and wanted to know the very same information you have. I also have a trucking business, a woman-owned, and also on SAMS and Hub certified, and a van a van business as well. So those are the things that I was wondering. Now, I'm also linked on to the ISBP. They comes on, every evening I get those the link to check for the contract, but mostly when I do see those, they're for contracted, contractor work, and so forth. There's nothing there, even though I check the transportation side, the Department of Transportation, there's never anything there for the type of business that Gunter and I, operate, the truck and the vans and so forth. So we were wondering, I'm thinking he's the same thinking as I as well. How can we get contracting business for those kind of trucks? Because I think earlier the young lady mentioned something about the quarry, and quarry work mostly deal with dump trucks. So they're moving dirts and gravels and all that stuff, but I don't do that. I do the 18-wheelers, van, and I also have the Sprinter van business as well. So, that's what I do.
Okay. And I see, John, you have your hand raised. Did you have some input here?
Yeah, sort of a question. When you're talking about Sprinter vans, like for smaller delivery kind of work?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So
I have that too. I have the 18-wheeler and also the Sprinter.
Okay. So one idea that I've got is it might be worth checking out like facilities management organizations within different departments. Because I know DOA, our Department of Administration, has a facility management group. And, in the coming few months, we're probably going to be doing a lot of moving of stuff because they're supposed to be tearing down our building. And all of our stuff has to go somewhere. So it may not be just out there on the website as we need somebody to haul something. It may be built into other projects. So you may need to pay attention to some of the construction things that says, we're doing renovations or we're doing moving from one building to another. But I think if you can reach out to some of the folks who are in the facilities management areas and like different universities, community colleges, they'll have folks who do that. And I'm not saying all of them always have something going on, but sometimes they will need somebody to shift something from one place to another. And the facilities folks, I would think, are likely to have a good handle on what needs to be moved around.
Thank you.
In addition to that, John, that's a great idea. I would I also consider reaching out to like the mail service center, because I know that I think they've had some challenges since COVID with just trying to get things moved from place to place. So that might be another idea to check. Again, we can't guarantee that they have work, but it's a place to call and check and see, what opportunities that they may have.
And if you check on the statewide term contract website, and I think we posted that earlier in the chat as to where to find that, there is a mail service statewide term contract, and somebody has that contract. It might be worth reaching out to them and saying, do you have any needs for subcontractors on that? It's not necessarily a contract directly with the state, but it might be something, that's business and experience that you could build towards, saying, hey, yeah, I've done state work because I've done it as a subcontractor for this other project.
Thank you.
And so I think that took care of all the hands raised, and any other questions will be answered in the chat. And so, Joni, we can proceed.
Thank you, Colin. Okay. So in this section, we're going to talk about mandated resources. We're going to talk about special provisions, and we're also going to talk a little bit about hub certification. So the mandated resources, which I had mentioned earlier, has to do with before we buy, the purchasing offices of the different agencies and universities, we must first consider, is it a mandatory state term contract out there? Is it something Correction Enterprise can provide? And et cetera, for all of those that are listed there, the state and federal surplus property, state construction office. Is there a MOU? Oh, excuse me, memorandum of understanding is what that means. Is there a contract between two state agencies that could provide the resource that we're looking for? So we are mandated to look at these different areas before we consider a competitive process or buying from a different different vendor. DIT. This is the statewide DIT procurement. They provide, of course, all the technology. They oversee all the technology purchases for the different agencies. They also have a delegation out there as well for IT purchases. For IT, they also have their own state term contracts for IT software, hardware, any IT service, and or any technology projects. And so just like we talked about the division of purchasing contracts for non-IT, which is under the umbrella of the Department of Administration. For IT, they are under the Department of Information Technology, and the statewide IT procurement office also has a website that you can go and take a look at, and on their website you will be able to see, what state term contracts they have or other purchasing requirements that they have for IT goods and services. So for our hub, this is really about making sure our participation, and we have a goal for each agency for both the construction spending and the purchasing of goods and services of 10%. And that's what we all certainly would love to see that, but at a minimum to try to reach that level. And that's why we spend the time, money, and effort in doing as what we're doing today, training and the different outreach opportunities that we put in place, because we are actively trying to make sure that we have hub participation on our contracts. We make sure that if you're hub certified, that you are identified that way in e-procurement and in the vendor portal. And we have added hub language to all our solicitations. We try to share what our projected upcoming opportunities are. We notify, my office does, and I'm sure that all the other agencies as well, notify the hub office of bid postings that we are planning to do. And we also provide a hub plan for the agency. This is an example of what that plan may look like. This is certainly, again, we always promote and encourage hub vendor selection, particularly in that small market purchase range right there, because there is no, I mean, they can just choose someone, right? Okay, I want you, and send and just use their P-card and make the purchase that way. In the next category, we kind of talked about this a little earlier. We want a minimum of 3 quotes. I encourage my team to try to have at least one of those quotes to be from a hub vendor. Would love for all 3 of them to be. And then, of course, then we have the open market, which is that $50,001 and above area. We, again, even in this category, we try to directly solicit at least 1 hub. And again, that's another reason why it's really important that you make sure your contact information is always current. Because, just like anyone else, we're trying to fill a need. Someone is waiting on this good in our service. So we need to move as quickly as possible, making sure we're following our procedures and making sure we're adhering to the administrative code for the state of North Carolina. Are there any questions about that section?
We do have, oh, I thought we had a hand raised. I believe that was from the last time. It looks like we're answering questions in the chat.
Okay.
The one question I will ask of you, Joni, it's from Kevin, who wants to know, are certain procurements marked as a hub set aside?
No. No, we don't have any set asides. We promote and encourage. That's the language that we use for hub participation, particularly again in those non-competitive areas where we are, selecting a vendor just based on mostly, honestly, they base it on historical data, like it's usually who we did business with last. These people know us. They know what we need. They give it to us. It always works. They're here on time. All those kinds of things. And so that's why when I suggest building relationships, it's important that they know you're out there and that they can depend on you and that you are able to provide the service that their needs. So no, to answer your question, there are no set asides.
Thank you, John. John also took care of it in the chat. So perfect. All right. We do have two hands raised. I have Tanya Green, if you want to unmute, and then we'll take care of Mr. Jerry McCants next. Tanya?
Hi, thank you. Yes, thank you. So my question is around a previous slide, the IT that you were speaking about. So I know that there is the Department of Information Technology, and it sounds like from my research in reaching out to them, that you're only able to be put on that vendor list once it opens up. And it could be, I don't know if it's annual or if they have longer engagements with the current vendors. But I do know it's not just kind of an open call where you can just reach out. There is a standard list of vendors for a certain period of time through the Department of Information Technology. But you also mentioned prior to that another way for IT staffing, for you to be able to do IT staffing with the state, and I missed that. So can you repeat that again for me?
So I don't recall talking about IT staffing, but again, and I think that what you were referring to getting on the list, I'm thinking that you were referring to state term contracts for IT. And again, I would look at each one, if it's an area in which you're wish to provide a service to or a good to, then I will look at that specific contract and see if it, obviously it's a contract, so there's something already in place. When does that contract end? And contact the person who's, because on all of the statewide contracts, there's a contact information there. I will contact that person and ask when they expect to solicit or compete that contract again. You should have some idea because the contract will tell you when it expires, and you'll get some idea when they plan on issuing a solicitation so that you have an opportunity to participate in that solicitation and have an opportunity to get awarded on the contract as well. And as you will see when you look at these state term contracts, most of them have more than one vendor. So it's not choose one and everyone else is not, it's out. So you want to be included on those contracts as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Jerry McCants, if you want to unmute.
Yes, good morning. This is Gary McCants, and I think John is answering my question I see in the chat about the question that was asked about the 10% goal setting. There needs to be a little bit more clarity on that, because I know the governor signed an executive order about having agencies try to meet 10% of their procurement or purchasing with hub vendors. So I'm going to yield to John, and he may be able to put some more clarity to that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Gary, nice to hear you today. The goal of 10%, there are goals on goods and services, and there are goals on construction. We're talking mostly about goods and services today. For goods and services, pretty much each governor that comes in signs an executive order that says our goal is going to be this. And it's been as low as 5%. It's been 10% for quite a while. And that is currently what the goal is. And there are some agencies that achieve it, a lot of agencies that don't. This is one of the reasons that we spend so much time doing the trainings and the outreach with agencies. I mean, that's one of the reasons that DOT is doing these trainings, is to let people know how to better work with and win opportunities. So it is a goal. We don't have any set asides. So the purpose of the hub program is to increase opportunities, and that means that whoever is bidding on the contract, they have to be able to provide the service and do what is asked, and be typically the lowest responsive bidder. It's not always lowest responsive bidder. There may be some criteria where they look at the solutions rather than just the price, but it kind of depends on that kind of project. So I think I did list in the chat some of our cabinet agencies that are doing reasonably well: revenue, commerce, natural and cultural resources, which does a lot of the parks and recreation and aquariums and trails, and the zoo. They do quite well with that. Public safety has done quite well. They recently split into public safety and adult corrections. So they both have a pretty long and strong interest in hub. Department of Military and Veterans Affairs has a pretty robust plan for that. Doesn't necessarily mean they are achieving that. Okay, so there was a follow-up question. Are there any documents or data on which agencies fall short of the 10% goal? Yes, every single year, every fiscal year, we post an annual report of all the agencies at the department level. So there's like 226 organizations that report on a quarterly basis for goods and services. And that includes state agencies, community colleges, universities, and school systems. On the construction side, we also get information from county governments and municipalities, but we don't get those reports from them for goods and services. And the reason that I point that out, and I can put the link to where you can find those reports in the chat, is that we list agency by agency, and we list out, the total dollars they reported, the hub dollars they reported, and that hub percentage. But then it's also broken out by hub certification category as well.
And what I would like to add, if I may, John, you have to participate to be awarded. Even though we, NCDOT, and I'm certain that my sister agencies also take extra steps to make sure that we let the hub know, and at DOT we also let the Office of Civil Rights know what we're posting and what opportunities are out there. but you have to respond to the solicitation. You have to submit a bid response in order to have an opportunity to be awarded. So I encourage you to submit a bid response if you
And
can
if you-
provide that good inner service.
And if somebody reaches out to you specifically and says, "Hey, can you provide, a quote for me?" Please respond, whether you can do it or not. It's important to respond. If you don't respond, then folks are not going to contact you. They'll be like, "Okay, this person never responds to me. I'm just going to stop reaching out to them." So that response part is important, whether it's yes, I can do it, here's my price, or I'm not available right now.
It looks like Tanya Green has her hand up. I'm not sure if that's just an old hand raised. But Joni, I think we can move forward and we can capture her question in the chat.
Absolutely. All right, in this section, we're going to talk about the types of solicitation documents. We're going to talk about the content of those documents, and we can talk about requirement versus evaluation criteria. So in the solicitation planning, what the end user usually provides to my office is they identify the need and they define what that is for them. They're going to gather some information together. We need them to develop the specification and the scope of work or work with us to develop it. The scope of work, the specification we really need from them because they are the subject matter experts. Again, what we do is the purchasing end of it. And so we need them to tell us exactly the specs for what they need. We get involved, we're going to review and authorize the documents and the processes that we will be using for the purchase. My office will prepare the actual solicitation document and we will either post it if it's advertised as is a requirement, or if it's not an approved waiver in place, or if it advertisement is not required, but solicitation, a different number of quotes is a requirement, then we will be sending it directly to a vendor. Again, it's important that your contact information is current there and that you respond. And as John said, even if you cannot take advantage of the opportunity that is sent to you, please respond and say that and ask to be, kept on the list so that they know that you are welcome, in the future opportunities. And so, again, the purchasing officer are not the subject matter experts. And so we really utilize our end user, the folks who really, who's going to actually use the good in us that we're purchasing, to make sure that the scope of work is accurate and that the requirements are what are really needed. Purchasing, mainly, we manage the award process. We're going to help with the evaluation. Again, I stated earlier that we actually prepare the solicitation using the information that we get from the end user. We're going to help manage the evaluation process. Again, making sure that we follow those administrative codes and those purchasing rules for the state. And we also will manage the recommendation portion of the actual awarding of the contract that comes from my office as well. Vendor direct quotes. This is a e-procurement tool actually, and this for goods and or services. It's used for purchases up to $25,000. And the purchaser or the buyer is able to select from a list of registered vendors. So that's another reason why it's important that you're registered and that your contact information is current. Another e-procurement tool is the IRQ, the informal request for quote. And this is, again, for either goods or services for purchases up to $50,000. The purchaser or the buyer is able to select from registered vendors. The quote is sent directly to the vendor. And in this case, the vendor, will be agreeing to the North Carolina terms and conditions. The RFQ, the request for a quote, is a solicitation document. If we have mentioned it earlier, is normally used for non-advertised procurements. It's sent directly to the vendor. The vendor is agreeing to the North Carolina terms and conditions. We can use it for seeking competition instead of the up to the $50,000 instead of the the informal quote document that we just spoke about. We could choose to use an RFQ as well. You can send your response via fax or email. I personally am not a fan of fax, so I do not have my office use fax. It's simply because the fax machine is shared by different departments here on our floor, and anything can happen to that fax before we get it, and we just won't have it. I just think it's a more straightforward process to use email, and so that's what I asked my office to do. But faxing is allowed, and other agencies may use it. And the responses are open upon receipt, and that is versus if a solicitation is posted on IPS or on the e-procurement, one of the e-procurement site, then that solicitation will give you a date and time in which it will be opened. And it's only until that date and time has reached will that solicitation be open. But in this informal process, the RFQ, once we receive them, we open them immediately. The IFB, invitation for bid, it is a formal solicitation document. We use it to seek competition for, again, well-defined goods and simple services. Generally, the purchases are estimated to be over $50,000. The bids will be evaluated. In some cases, the award would be based on the lowest responsive bid meeting specification and requirements. We do use the IFB for what we call best value. So it would not be awarded based on low cost. It would be awarded based on meeting the highest score, meeting the score, not cost, score, meeting the criteria requirements that's listed in the solicitation. So please make sure if it's an IFB, you understand how it's being awarded. Is it a low cost meet spec? Which is how we say it, but it's the same as this lowest responsible bid meeting specification, or is it best value? And if it says best value, then it will be awarded it will be evaluated based on a criteria that's also listed in that document, right? It's posted to IPS, and it has to be posted there a minimum of 10 days. And there is a public bid opening or potential site visit, which we'll talk about more of in just a moment. So the RFP, the request for proposal, this is again a formal solicitation document. We use it for seeking competition and obtaining offers for more complex services or a combination of goods and services that are estimated over $50,000, and generally it's well over $50,000. So this is really when we're asking for proposal, that's when we know what the end result we want, but we want the vendor's proposal on how best to get there. What's the best solution to get us what we want? And that's what we're asking you to provide us. The evaluation method can be other than lowest cost. I have yet to see, and I've been doing this for a little while, a RFP, a request for a proposal, that is awarded based on lowest cost meeting specification. Most of them, almost all, are best value. And that is a process in which cost is considered, but it's not the most important factor. It's important. I don't want to step away from that, but it's not the most important factor that's being considered. These also have to be posted to IPS for a minimum of 10 days. And again, these will be opened at the specified day and time, and they also could require a site visit. The RFI, the request for information, this is really the purpose of this is when we want to just gather information, ascertain as to the level of interest for potential vendors. It is not a solicitation. There would be no award or offer as a result of it. There would be no state terms and conditions attached to it. After the response period is canceled in IPS. So it is just what it is, a request for information. It gives us some information to help us make a decision about whether we want to or have the capacity to actual solicit in a certain area, whether it's a good or service. So the just at a high level, the different sections of the solicitation document. The first section, 1.0, is typically purpose and background. This is where the agency will tell you why we are making this purchase. And 2.0 is the general information, and that's where you would see the schedule for the solicitation, the date it would post in. You would the day was posted, the date, the bid opening, date and time of the bid opening. They may even include when the contract award date may be there as well. It's not that date is not a requirement, so it may not be there, but some agencies use it and some do not. In 2.0, you also see the question period I talked about. You submit written questions. In that section, you would find when the questions are due and how the email contact for the person to send you a written question to. What contents, if any, need to be included with your bid would be there. There'll be bid submittal information. If we require copies, how many, and in what format, whether it's digital or not, or paper. In section 3, the method of award and bid evaluation, that's where you're going to be told whether it's going to be the lowest cost meeting specification, or whether it's going to be a best value award. If there is any confidentiality requirements, that information will be provided there as well. If it's a best value, the evaluation criteria will be listed in that section 3.0. In 4.0, the requirements, that's where you typically, where we are providing you with most of the information. There is a section in there in which we need information back from you. In that section, we're going to talk about pricing, invoices, delivery, what the warranty. If we require references, it'll be in that section as well. If there is any previous experience required in order to submit a bid, in order to be a responsive bid, then that vendor experience information will be there. If any samples are required, that would be there as well. We also could very well ask about financial stability in that section. If there's any certifications or licensures that are required, that would be there. If we need to do a background check, that information would be in that section as well. If there are some requirements for personnel that work on the contract, that information will be provided in 4.0 as well. And 5.0, we're going to talk in that section about the scope of work and the product specification. That's where you're going to kind of know what the requirements are. The objectives are there, specifications or requirements, what tasks, if there's any deviations, and allow what they would be. If there is any certification for safety, or we also could have our technical approach requirements listed in that, and any project organization will be provided in that section as well. In 6.0, we're going to talk about the contract administration. We're going to asks you to provide us with contact information for who would be your project manager if you awarded the contract. We will also provide you with who would be the project manager for the state once the contract is awarded. If there is any reporting requirements, that would be in that section. If there's hopefully there's a dispute on how that would be resolved with information, language would be there for that. If there's any needed contract changes, how that would be handled, that information would be there as well. And of course, if there's a product recall, we have provided you with what we expect from you with regard to that in terms of contact and sharing of information. There are some attachments. That's where you will find the pricing form in which you will complete and send back, obviously. There's instructions for the vendors there. You will find a link for the North Carolina terms and conditions now. There's also a location of workers there. The EO 50 price matching is there. The financial conditions form is there. Any supplemental vendor information. And if there is any maps and or diagrams that we need to provide for you, that information will be in the attachments as well. The documents of change, these are really talking about, remember what documents we use once we start the solicitation process is really what the documents of change relates to. So for the first one, the addendum, if there's any changes made to a solicitation document before opening, that again, remember I was saying that if for the questions period, once that period is reached, then I will put all the questions on a table and all the responses and post it back on IPS. I will post it using an addendum, right? And that addendum, any posted addendums is contractually included. Information on that is contractually included in the contract at the point of award. So that's another reason why it's important that if you have a question, please make sure you submit it in writing so that it can be included on this addendum and therefore makes it binding on the state's behalf, right? Request for clarification, once we have posted the solicitation and gotten responses, and if we have clarifying questions, we will use what we call a request for clarification, send it to you, ask you to confirm our understanding of some portion of your offer. It is not an opportunity for you to change your bid. That's not allowed, but it just provides us with some clarification. Generally, it's yes or no answers, and we have a box there, yes or no, for you to check. Best and final offer, this is used when we are actually going to negotiations with a vendor. It is also becomes a legal part of the awarded contract. It is not always used, so please don't ever submit a bid with the expectation that you're going to go into negotiations, because that's not always used. Generally, it is when we are doing those more complex kinds of RFPs in which we do that. Generally, what happens is the top 3 or 4 proposals that we receive, we will enter negotiation with those specific vendors, speak with them obviously separately, asking additional questions and requirements, and negotiate on their specific offer. And after that negotiations are done, then the evaluation team will also provide another evaluation, and that helps us get to our recommendation for award. And an amendment is the document that we use after the contract has been awarded. So any changes to the contract after that, it is called an amendment. Information on how that will be handled is included in the solicitation document. And it requires an agreement on both sides both the states and the vendors. And it's an actual document that will be sent out to the vendor with identifying the changes and a section for the vendor to agree and sign as well. So submitting a bid or proposal, there are certain things that you need to make sure you pay attention to. It is really, really important that you read the entire solicitation very carefully. There's some words in there you should pay attention to, like shall, must, and mandatory, right? That we can't work around those. If we say shall or must and you do not, then you are not a responsive bid and your offer would not be considered in for evaluation and award. So please pay close attention. Please read the document carefully. Know that your signature means that you understand what you're reading and that you agree. The box you see there with the error is where the box is where you will provide your your name of your company, your address, and your contact information. And please, please, please make sure you sign, because if you send in an offer that is not signed, it is not a binding offer for the state. So it's pretty important. There are a few exceptions to that with regard to the RFP, so I would not rely on that because my experience is that depending upon the legal folks that are reviewing it, and in the RFP, it's generally required that you send in a company on company letterhead your intention to submit an offer. On that letterhead, you would sign, sign it, print your name. There have been legal argument that page is a legal binding offer, and so if you don't sign the actual RFP and that's in the blue section that's shown here on the screen, then we do have a legal binding offer because you signed that sheet. I would not rely on that. I would make sure I sign that box. This is an example of the table that is inside the solicitation document. The first line is obviously the title, but the second line starts with the issues of solicitation, responsibility, obviously with the state, and we will put the date that we issued or posted the solicitation. If there is a pre-bid or a site visit required, obviously that's the responsibility of the state, and we will put the day and time of the pre-bid meeting or the site visit. If you have written questions that you want to submit, then the deadline to do so will be provided there, the date and time of the deadline. Provide responses to questions. Obviously, that's a responsibility of the state. You may see some solicitations without that line, but generally, the thought is to get the responses out to you. That will give you time to get the responses and also give you time to formulate your offer and be able to submit it on time. So the closer we get to the bid opening date, the chances are, before we put the responses to questions out there, then chances are we will move that date. But please pay attention to IPS and to any addendums that are issued after the posting date, because they could contain critical information that you would need to know in order to submit your best offer. The submit bid is obviously is what you would do, but we will have a date and time there on when they are due. We do not consider any late bids. That is non-negotiable, period. It is your responsibility to have the bid where it's supposed to be by the time a day is supposed to be there. We would accept the bid, but I can tell you that we will not open it and we will not review it. We will not consider it. It cannot be late, period. I cannot stress that enough. The contract award date, that line may be included in some solicitation. In fact, the last two lines did a contract award date, contract effective dates. You may see that or you may not. That's optional. And if the contract award date is there, that is with the best intentions, the date that the state tend to award the contract. Please keep in mind the award process can be complicated, and that date could slip a little bit. And the contract effective date obviously will be the influence of that is going to be the contract award date. So again, you may or may not see those last two lines there. But if you do, please know that those are best intentions date in terms of when they want to award the contract and when the contract effective date will begin. Vendor questions. So as mentioned earlier, that you may only contact the purchasing staff that's listed on the solicitation during the solicitation process. And the solicitation process begins at the point of posting until an actual award. So anytime between those two dates, if you have a question on that specific solicitation, please contact the purchasing staff member that is listed on the solicitation document. Please submit your question in writing so that it will be legally binding, okay? Well, questions answered via phone or in person on site visits are not binding. So even if you're on a site visit, and we'll talk about that and I think next, but if you're on a site visit, you're welcome to ask any questions you have. But when I got home, I will make sure I immediately email the question I asked to the person listed as the contact for that purchase, so that I can get a legally binding response that's included on the addendum, which becomes a part of the contract. All vendor questions submitted by the deadline will be answered and posted to IPS. We talked about site visits. Site visits or pre-bid meetings are only necessary if the vendor would need to physically see the location or gather additional information to provide a responsive proposal. So site visits can either be mandatory or they can be urged and cautioned. If it's mandatory, it will have a, well, either way, it's going to tell you the solicitation document will have a specific date, time, and location of the site visit listed there. We're going to ask you to sign in and out with time of arrival and departure noted there. For the mandatory ones, if you're late, you can attend, but your offer would not be accepted. And we will have taken up the sign-in sheet, right? You're not going to get into any altercations with anyone or any, discussions about you being there, but we will not consider your offer if you're late. Urged and cautioned, you can attend. Again, attendance is not a requirement. So we may ask you to sign in, but that attendance sheet will not be used to vet against any offers that we receive. It is exactly what it says. We urge you to come and we caution that you need to come. But if you feel that you do not need to do that and you want to submit an offer, we will consider it if it says urged and cautioned. If it says mandatory, it means if you're not there or if you're late, we will not consider any offer that you submit with it. So the submittal instructions, please be sure that you follow them and provide whatever required information with your solicitation submission. Any mandatory return information. If it's a mandatory site, make sure you're there. Whether it's a direct submittal, whether if it's email or if it's mail, NCB bids, or on the sourcing tool, just however, make sure you follow the submittal instructions that is provided with each solicitation. Vendor requirements. These is where we, the state, will list what the specifications that the vendor must meet or submit with this proposal to be found responsive, right? If we say that you must be able to deliver within 30 days, if you answer that you can deliver within 40 days, then you're not responsive because you can't meet the requirements. Requirements are yes or no and not evaluated, right? Either you can do it or you can't. There's a gate there, yes or no. As some examples, that's kind of what I just said. Is talk about delivery within 15 consecutive calendar days. If you say you do something over the 15 days, then you're not meeting the requirements. If we tell you that your proposal, you must include a copy of your general contractor license, and you have not submitted a responsive bid. If we ask for 3 references that you have provided similar services for, and you do not provide those 3 references, your bid is technically not responsive. So just keep that in mind, please, and make sure you follow the instructions that are in each solicitation. The evaluation criteria, this is how. This is where you tell us how you plan to complete the project. Some possible evaluation criteria, and what the state would be evaluating would be, it could be vendor experience, your past experience. In this proposal, the vendor should demonstrate experience with public and private sector clients with similar or greater size and complexity to the state. If we're asking you for a staffing plan, who will perform the work, you should provide the information in terms of the qualification and experience of all of the proposed staff that you want to assign to the project. And if we're asking for a technical approach, that's your way of telling us how you're going to meet our business requirements. You should include in narrative, in outline, or in some type of graphic form how your approach to accomplishing the task will, what your approach to accomplishing the task will be. And it's really important that you pay attention to that, because that will be evaluated. So those are just examples of evaluation criteria, but the solicitation document itself will state very clearly what the evaluation criteria will be. Are there any questions?
Do have one hand raised, Michelle Neal, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, I was wanting to know, like, when it's talking about questions that you should, that you may want to submit, what type of questions should we really be submitting? And then the other question is, what can you expect? What can you expect when you go to a pre-bid meeting? I mean, what am I going to see?
Well, if it's a pre-bid meeting, then they're going to be talking about a little bit more about the project or the service that they're looking for. Providing some perhaps some technical requirements, additional information that will be used in conjunction with what the information that's already listed in the solicitation document. If it's an actual site visit, you are going to actually see, if you're a janitorial company, you're going to go to the building that you'll be cleaning, so you can see the size, the requirement. If you're painting a building, you're going to go to the building that you're going to be painting, so you can measure, determine how much paint you're going to need, understand the colors that are required. With that should also be listed in solicitation. So you're going to gather information, whether it's a pre-bid meeting or it's a site visit. It's the purpose for you, the vendor, to gather information that you would need to help you in your bid submission response.
Okay. And then what type of questions should we be sending in? Like if we were wanting to send questions in, I mean, what specific things are they looking for in general when you?
So you don't have to submit any questions. You don't have to. That's if you have one. So if you read the solicitation and you have a question, or if you think that one of the technical requirements is not, the current market requirement, then that's an opportunity for you to say, hey, North Carolina Department of Transportation, in section 3.4, you specified that you want to X. The current market is only selling Y. Are you sure? That kind of thing. So you don't have to submit a question, but if you see something in the solicitation itself that you have a question about, that's an opportunity for you to ask the question.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome.
And we also have a question from Real Property Management, if you want to unmute and ask.
Thank you. Good morning. Going back to the tips and tools class. Will that class, and thank you for all of this great information today, will that class sort of cover some of the things that you've talked about today on, how to get started, the first steps that you have to do, etc.?
We could cover that as well. I think we were speaking earlier about walking through a solicitation document. It's probably going to speak more about, there was a slide that talks about the different sections. So we will go a little bit more in depth in each one of the sections to talk about that. But we talk about different subjects. So again, if there is a subject you would like for us to speak of, I would send that information to Nicole, and we will see how quickly we could put together some type of training on what, or even include it on something we already got currently planned, if timing allows.
Okay. I'll send an email. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. That is all of the questions that we have currently. I think we can proceed.
Thank you. All right. In this section, we're going to be talking about solicitation response method, whether it's a direct submittal, whether it's a collaborative, or whether you're using IPS. So the different ways or options to submit your proposal or your bid submission is either direct submittal over email, whether it's e-procurement collaborative, that's a tool within e-procurement, or IPS, whether it's by mail or NC bids or using the sourcing tool. It's important that you read the solicitation document to see which method would be used for that specific solicitation, because all these different options are out there, but it will tell you specifically in the solicitation document how to submit your response. So the collaborative space is another is an informal quoting and pricing request function that's within e-procurement. We can use it to obtain quotes for goods and services from multiple vendors at the same time. The vendor will agree to the terms and conditions of the state, and is generally used for purchases up to $25,000. The IPS system is used to post formal solicitation. Generally, those are our IFB's invitation for bid and our RFP, request for proposal solicitations. It allows the state to be able to advertise for goods and services. We are seeking open and fair competition. It also a place where we will post the notices of contract award once we've gone through the evaluation portion of the process. It allows the vendors to be able to market their goods and services, as stated earlier. It's also a business opportunity that's available 24/7, and it's a free vendor on the EVP registration is a free notifications of business opportunities, and of course, it's a place where you can view the bid tabulations and award information. In this, we are just wanted to show you what it could look like on IPS. If you click on the solicitation number that's there to bring the bid up, if you click on the button to the right or the section that is pointing to, it'll take you to the bid, the page to submit the bid. NC Bids, this is the North Carolina Business Invitation Delivery System. It's a feature of IPS. Vendors must be registered on the vendor portal to use it. You need a username and password is required in order to do it. E-procurement sourcing. This is, you need, again, to be registered in EVP to use this feature. And it is, username and password is required to respond electronically as well for the sourcing tool. On this slide, we are showing the at the top, the title or the name of the sourcing event is listed there. In the middle there, if you were submitting a bid, the response you would use, that's where you would do it. And there in the summary of solicitation, it provides a summary of the solicitation opportunity there. On this slide, we are, if there's any prerequisite, you click on that middle or the second to the left review prerequisite button there. At the very top, you see there's a countdown clock that lets you know the time that's remaining to submit your bid. And then there's also a checklist to the left of the steps to take, and some content is listed there as well. Are there any questions?
Let's see if I'm not sure if the real property management hand raised is left over from last time. It looks like.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay, we'll keep going.
Yes, we do not have questions in the chat.
So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about bid openings, the evaluation methods, the reference checks, executive order 50. And clarifications and baffles. I'm sorry. So in the bid and proposal opening, this is part of the formal bid process. Is you will see the publicly open date and time and location. It's a public opening. You either can attend it if it's electronically, or you can physically if it's a. We also still do mail-ins, bids here at NCDOT as well, and you are free to come here for public bid opening. Or you can always email the purchaser whose name and contact information is on the solicitation document after the bid opening date and ask for a list of the vendors who submitted a bid. That's public information at that point as well. So they can tell you that. They may or may not be able to include the pricing, because if we think that we're going to go into negotiations, we are not going to reveal pricing. If it's a low cost meet spec, we will provide costing along with the vendor, the names of the vendors that submitted a bid. Attendance is taken at the bid openings, and tabulations are posted on IPS for the bid openings, as long as there are no expected negotiations to take place. The evaluation methods, the bid response is going to be evaluated in one of three ways. It's either going to be lowest cost method. It's often called the low cost meet spec. We're going to, where the bid meets all the requirements, it's the lowest cost to the agency. That's who's going to get the award in those instances. When the evaluation method is lowest cost method, if it's the best value and it's weighted, you will see that the weights will add up to 100. The different components can have different weights. Like the technical approach can weigh a certain thing, the cost can weigh a certain thing, the requirements can weigh a certain thing, but either way, they will add up to be 100. I'm not a fan of that weighted method, but it's used and it's a legal way of doing it. And the third way is the narrative method, which is my favorite. And this is really a written account of the merit of the bid proposal, usually categorized as strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to use those same evaluation criteria, and we're going to evaluate it and talk about the strengths of it and the weaknesses. I think it's a component that enhances the potential success or contribute towards the exceeding the contractual requirements. Those are what we would call a strength, right? So what's extra about that? So, right? So you meet the requirements and then you have something above that, that's a strength. If you don't meet the requirements, you meet the requirements, I'm sorry, but we still was looking for something that you didn't include, we consider that a weakness or a flaw that we saw that we expected to see, but it wasn't there. So those are just graphics for those three. And so for reference checks, it's used to confirm the vendor has performed the services or the offered product to the same size of scope or job performance that we are looking for. The section can be added to the solicitation document. It doesn't have to be there, may or may not require references. It can be used as a vendor requirement if so desired. We will either call every bid submission reference or we will call no references. In other words, if we have 5 vendors who submitted a reference, we're not going to submit a bid with references. We're not going to call 3 of them, don't call the other 2, right? We either going to call all references or no references. We're going to ask them the same questions, and we're going to document the day and time, who we talked to, and what the responses are. So we're going to handle all submissions in the same way with regards to the reference check. Clarifications and BAFOs. The request for clarification, spoke briefly about that earlier, is really you're clarifying something that's unclear to the purchasing office or the end user in your proposal or your submission. Is usually a yes or no, right? The state, we won't be asking you to provide additional information that's not already submitted with your proposal. You're just clarifying information for us. And it's not an opportunity to alter the proposed price that's submitted with your your proposal. And so the BAFO is what we call, which is the best and final offer. That's when negotiations are in place. We can do it either over the phone, email, but normally, again, they are used specifically for our more complex products or services. And they are generally, well, with the COVID times, we've had them via Teams, as we're doing this morning. But previously, and we still now could call someone in, actually come into the office and have a face-to-face meeting. In the BAFO, you can alter your proposal. That's kind of what we're asking you to do with a final offer. And so you will respond to, after the meeting, we will send you a best and final offer document, which is really small, it's generally 3 to 4 pages. But please remember that the state doesn't have to negotiate with any vendors at all. So make sure when you submit your proposal or your response that you provide the best offer that you can. So Executive Order 50 is an opportunity for price matching for North Carolina vendors. It's used for goods but not services. The vendor must indicate whether you want to participate when you submit your bid. And the North Carolina vendor's pricing must be within 5% or $10,000 of the non-resident vendor in order to be able to do price match. Are there any questions?
I am not seeing questions in the chat, and we have no hands raised. So unless someone has a question, Desmond Barnes, I see you have your hand raised. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
Hey, how you all doing? Thank you so much for taking time to walk us through this. I have a few questions. I think they're pretty quick and easy to answer. For the evaluation methods, are they shared at the time that you place the bid?
They are shared at the time that we post the bid.
Okay.
So in the solicitation document, it will be clearly stated how the evaluation will take place. Let me go back. It will clearly say how the award will be made, whether it be low cost means specification or best value. If it's low cost means specification, there are no requirements. You just have to meet the requirements. I mean, there are no criteria, evaluation criteria, because you just have to be able to provide the service or the goods that's being asked for and provided at the lowest cost. If it's best value, there will be a evaluation process that's done, and the criteria, the things that would be evaluated would be clearly listed in that document as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
For bids that may have been awarded to someone else in the past, is it possible to see when that current bid is about to expire? Like
Yes.
when okay.
That's a public record request, so you can send that in. Yes.
And for the public record request, my assumption is that if I'm looking at so someone shared a link earlier in the chat that basically highlighted different government entities. So I kind of got hyper focused on the public institutions and school systems, where it highlights, their spending in different, in different classifications. Which classification has the most hierarchy when you guys are listing Black, Hispanic, and women? So if it's a Black woman, would that person be listed as Black, or would they be listed as women as it relates to how the bids have been awarded in the past?
So we're not looking at that level in terms of award. We just want to know that you're HUB certified, right? And then I think when we submit when our awards are taking place, it is electronically that data is captured, sent over to what John and them do, and it is further classified, I think, at that point. But we are not looking at whether it's a woman or Black or some other minority. We're just looking at, is it HUB certified at the point of award.
Okay, awesome. All right, those are the questions I had. Thank you.
You're welcome.
With no more questions, we can proceed on.
Thank you, caller.
You're welcome.
So in this section, we're going to talk about award notifications, purchase orders, and invoicing. So award notification, the agency purchase and office sends a certification of award memo to the vendor. All the documentation will be attached. E-procurement, a purchase order will be issued. The award will be posted to IPS. We work to try to make sure we do it within 30 days. But whenever we get it posted out there, it will be posted for at least 30 days on the site. And once the contract award is received, at that point, the vendor will work directly with the end user or the contract administrator to go off and do the work, and purchasing is out of the process at that point. Information on purchase orders, there's just a list of information that could be included, but it's not limited to these things. The things that I like to point out, there's this description of the items or the service that we are purchasing would be there. Pricing obviously would be there. Delivery schedule, the payment terms, any terms and conditions. And if we have any comments to the vendors, those are typical kinds of information that's included on the purchase orders. And on our invoicing, the vendor is to invoice the ordering division. All the information is included there. The item description of the service completed, the purchase order number, which could be the same thing as the contract number in most cases. You need to make sure that your remit to address is current so that you are getting any notifications from that. Typically, the state pays in net 30 days. Our check rates are on Tuesdays and Thursdays for North Carolina Department of Transportation. We also have the capacity for the electronic payments, and we are urging everyone that can do ACH to do so. Are there any questions?
Do not have any questions in the chat nor hands raised. We can move forward.
Thank you. In this section, we're going to talk quickly about contract management, inspections and testing, and renewals and amendments, vendor protests, and the public records requests. So a contract kickoff meeting is what happens after the contract is awarded. And in that meeting, things are like terms and conditions are clarified. We clarify any goals or objectives. And it's a meeting between the awarded vendor and the end user. So purchasing probably can participate in that meeting just to make sure everyone understands. But that meeting also can take place without purchasing. There's where the communication of roles and responsibilities will be clarified as well. Make sure everybody's on the same page. And then obviously delivery expectations will be discussed, could be discussed at that meeting as well. For inspection and testing, this is where the state would notify the vendor if there's any damaged goods, if the inaccurate order is supplied. If there's any late shipment, we'll do some notification on that. If there's quality acceptance inspection or delivery installation expectations, that information will be discussed with the awarded vendor. Invoices would not be paid until if there's an inspection required until the inspection has taken place. And then delivery is not considered to have happened until the installation has been completed. And if there is any waste or debris that is on the site, until all that has been removed as well. If there are any vendor complaints, it will be handled by the contract administration, including my office in that process. So we're going to go back and see what is the contractual requirements and what has not been met, and communicate that and give you an opportunity to give you a cure letter, which gives you an opportunity to make right what the complaint is. For renewals, again, contracts are standard, usually 3 years. Again, it's usually worded in for 1 year with 2 one-year renewable options. Our oversight agencies, purchase and contracts, and the statewide IT procurement office is required if we want a contract. Approval from them is required if we want a contract over 3 years. The renewals are optional. Please remember that they do not have to be exercised. It's on the states. It's up to the state to make a decision on whether to renew or not. If we decide to renew, obviously we would generate a new purchase order with regard to that to update the existing one. For amendments, again, that's used to change in the rates, in a contract term, the scope, and the cost. And those amendments have to come through the purchasing office. Any change to the contract has to come through the purchasing office. Vendor protests, it must be submitted in written form and to the procurement director for any awards up to $50,000. If it's in excess to the agency delegation, which again, remember, is $50,000, it will be sent to the state purchasing officer with the Division of Purchasing Contracts. And that office will work with, in my case, if it's the NCDOT, will work with me to get all the, to read what your complaint is or your protest is, and I will provide him with all the information that he would need in order to respond to the protest. The protest must be submitted within 30 consecutive calendar days from the date of the contract award. And your protest letter must contain specific reasons and any supporting documentation to support your protest should be submitted with with your written documentation within that 30-day calendar day window from the date of award. The public records request, you're able to submit, again, after contracts are awarded, they become public information. Please keep in mind there's some information that has been identified by the supplier as being proprietary or confidential. And we would not release that information, but if we get a bid submission in which the vendor has indicated that they have proprietary or confidential information there, we will send them a clarifying letter and inform, basically is our way of informing them, are you sure that this information is either confidential or proprietary? They have to say yes or no. And we also make sure they understand that we would not, if they indicate yes, that we would not provide that information. And if there is a legal challenge to that information being confidential or proprietary, then the expectation is that the state is not going to fight on the behalf of the vendor to protect having not to disclose that information. If there is a lawsuit that is issued, the state is expecting and informing the vendor that at that point you will have to step in and defend against whatever entity is requesting this information. So we're not going to fight. We, the state, is not going to fight on anyone's behalf. We will not provide the information. So, but if there's a legal challenge to the information, the expectation is that the vendor will provide that defense for that. And again, you can submit a public record request for any information for any contract that has been awarded. Again, the information may include some redacted information. Only the pricing information and the current vendor on the contract will be released while a contract is out for bid. So if the information is posted, we're only going to provide you with certain information with regard to it until an award is made or until the decision is made that we will cancel the solicitation. These are some quick website resources for you that I think would be helpful. There's this statewide purchase and contract, division of purchase and contract is there. Statewide IT procurement office is next. Then of course the vendor portal, IPS, e-procurement, and HERS Hub certification. Are there any questions?
And so let's see. We do have one question in the chat, and that question is there a way to see the expenses, DOT, to see where you have historically spent money on goods and services?
Is there a way to see that? I think the thing that would be most helpful to you in that instance would be maybe our hub plan or our procurement plan, which we provide to Division of Purchase and Contracts. You can always reach out to Nicole. I don't know that there's one place in which I could point you where you would see where we historically spend money. I mean, the information obviously is reported at different places across the state. You know, this is taxpayers' money, so there's no secrets about it. But I really do not know of one place where you can see that. But obviously, North Carolina Department of Transportation has the responsibility of moving people and things safely across the state. So anything that relates to that, then do we have some expense to it? So I don't know of one place where you would get that information. I'm sorry. But we
I-
can certainly give you the different business units that we have and the names and locations of our 14 divisions.
Right. I do not see any other questions in the chat. If there are any questions, you can feel free to unmute at this time. We do have our survey in the chat as a reminder. If you would give us your feedback, it would be greatly appreciated. Joni, thank you so much on behalf of the Hub office and Director Tammy Hall. Thank you for the wealth of information that you have provided and for this very engaging and informative session. To our Hub vendors, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. We hope that you find this information helpful in continuing to grow your business and do business with state procurement. We invite you to stay engaged through our outreach efforts, which are found on our website, and I also placed the link in the chat. And I do see that there was a hand raised, so I will give you an opportunity. That was Teresa Barker, if you want to ask your question. If no more questions, thank you again for your time and attention for this session.